Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chicago's most exclusive casino, while a pregnant woman stood center stage, drenched in red punch, cameras flashing as her mafia boss husband laughed at her humiliation. But when three armored SUVs crashed through the entrance and her billionaire brothers stepped into the chaos with murder in their eyes, everyone realized the same thing: someone in this room was about to die. If you want to see how a queen rises from the ashes of betrayal, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches. The Verona Royale Casino sat like a gilded fortress against Chicago's midnight skyline, 30 floors of blood money wrapped in marble and glass. Rain streaked the windows while inside, beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most houses, the city's criminal elite gathered for what they thought would be another evening of excess and intimidation. They were wrong. Serafina Moretti stood in the ballroom's center, 6 months pregnant, wearing a silver gown that cost more than her dignity was apparently worth. Her hands trembled against her swollen belly, while 300 faces watched with the detached interest of people who'd seen worse and done nothing. The casino's head of security had escorted her onto the stage 20 minutes earlier. No explanation, just a hand on her elbow and a whispered instruction to wait. Now stage lights burned against her skin while whispers rippled through the crowd like poison. She knew something terrible was coming. She could taste it. Lorenzo De Luca emerged from the VIP section like a king surveying his kingdom. 6'3" of tailored menace, black tattoos crawling up his neck above a custom Italian suit, eyes cold enough to freeze blood. He'd built an empire from street corners and body counts, transformed himself from a South Side enforcer into the most feared crime boss between New York and Los Angeles. And Serafina had loved him through every terrible transformation. "You look nervous, baby," Lorenzo called out, his voice cutting through the jazz music like a blade. The crowd laughed obediently. Serafina's throat tightened. "What's happening?" "Just a little demonstration." He gestured lazily toward the crowd. "See all these people? Senators, judges, cartel representatives. They need to understand something about power." A woman emerged from behind Lorenzo wearing a blood-red satin dress that clung to her body like sin. Vivica Kane, his attorney, his advisor, his mistress. Everyone knew. Serafina had pretended not to notice for 2 years because acknowledging the truth meant admitting she'd destroyed her entire life for a man who viewed her as property. Vivica carried a crystal punch bowl filled with something dark and red. "Lorenzo, please," Serafina started. "Shut up." The words hit harder than a fist. Around the ballroom, conversations died. Cell phones appeared. Someone was going to record this. Someone always did. Lorenzo climbed onto the stage with the casual grace of a predator. Up close, Serafina could see the rage simmering beneath his performance. She'd seen that look before, usually right before someone disappeared. 7 years, he said quietly, for her ears only. "You really thought that meant something?" "I gave up everything for you." "I know, that's what made you so goddamn useful." Then louder for the audience. "My wife seems to think she's special. That carrying my child means she gets a voice in my business. That marriage is some kind of partnership." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nervous, eager, hungry for violence dressed as entertainment. Serafina's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Not here, not for these people. Lorenzo took the punch bowl from Vivica with exaggerated ceremony. "Let me teach everyone a lesson about knowing your place." The freezing liquid hit Serafina like a physical blow. Red punch crashed over her head, soaking through her hair, her dress, running in cold rivers over her pregnant stomach. The shock stole her breath. Gasps echoed through the ballroom, but nobody moved. Nobody helped. Because when Lorenzo De Luca wanted to make a point, survival meant silence. Cameras flashed like lightning. Serafina stood there shaking, dress clinging to her body, arms wrapped around her unborn child, while 300 people watched her destruction and did absolutely nothing. "That's better," Lorenzo said softly. "Now you look like what you are." Vivica smiled from the shadows. Serafina's knees threatened to give out. The stage lights felt like interrogation lamps. Every face in the crowd blurred into a mass of indifference and cruelty. This was her life now. This was what 7 years of loyalty had earned her. She thought about the girl she'd been before Lorenzo. daughter of the Moretti family, sister to three of the most powerful men in international business. She'd walked away from billions, from protection, from unconditional love, because Lorenzo had convinced her that real strength meant choosing him over everything. Turns out she'd just been easy to manipulate. "You done making your point?" she whispered. Lorenzo leaned close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with whiskey. "Baby, I haven't even started." He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, just firm enough to remind her who controlled this room, and yanked her toward center stage. The crowd pressed closer, phones raised, recording her humiliation for whatever dark corners of the internet trafficked in this kind of content. "See this woman?" Lorenzo addressed the ballroom like a teacher with a particularly stupid student. 5 years ago, she was a Moretti. You know that name. Shipping, defense contracts, political connections that make presidents sweat. Some of the older mob bosses nodded. Everyone knew the Moretti brothers. "She gave all that up for me," Lorenzo continued. "Cut off her family, walked away from a trust fund that could buy small countries. And you know why?" Silence. "Because I told her to." He released Serafina's wrist and she stumbled backward. "That's power. Making someone destroy themselves because they think it's love." The words landed like bullets. Serafina felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, that had broken months ago when she'd first found evidence of Vivica. No, this was deeper. This was the part of her that had spent 7 years making excuses, justifying cruelty, convincing herself that Lorenzo's version of love was just more intense than other people's. She was done. "You're right," she said quietly. Lorenzo frowned. He hadn't expected her to speak. "I did destroy myself," Serafina continued, voice gaining strength. "I chose you over people who actually loved me. I defended you to my brothers when they tried to warn me. I ignored every red flag because I was so desperate to prove I wasn't just some spoiled rich girl playing at independence." Serafina. "I'm not finished." The words came out sharp. Around the ballroom, people leaned forward slightly. This wasn't part of Lorenzo's script. "You're not powerful because you broke me. You're just a coward who needed someone weaker to feel strong." Lorenzo's expression went cold. "Get her out of here," he told his security team. But before anyone could move, the casino's massive entrance doors exploded inward. Not open. Exploded. The reinforced glass shattered in a cascade of crystalline destruction as 3 matte black armored SUVs screeched to a halt in the casino's marble lobby. Armed guards throughout the Verona Royale reached for weapons before freezing in terror. Because the men stepping through that shattered entrance weren't police. They were worse. Dominic Moretti moved first, 6'4" of controlled fury, in an obsidian suit that probably cost more than the casino's annual revenue. Behind him came Adrian, scanning the crowd with the cold precision of someone who'd spent years dismantling enemy organizations. And finally Silas, calmly typing on his phone like he'd just arrived for a business meeting instead of a war. The Moretti brothers. Serafina's knees actually did give out this time. She hadn't seen them in 5 years. Not since the day she'd told Dominic to his face that Lorenzo was her family now, that she didn't need their protection or their money or their suffocating concern. She'd meant every word back then. She'd been so incredibly wrong. Dominic crossed the ballroom floor with terrifying calm. 300 criminals, corrupt politicians, and cartel negotiators instinctively stepped out of his path. The Moretti brothers weren't just wealthy. They controlled infrastructure that made modern civilization function. Shipping routes, encrypted banking systems, private military contractors. They didn't need to raise their voices or make threats. They just needed to arrive. Lorenzo finally recognized them. His smirk faltered. "You've got some fucking nerve," he started. Dominic moved so fast Lorenzo didn't see it coming. One moment he was standing there radiating false confidence. The next Dominic had him by the throat, lifting him onto his toes with one hand. "Say another word," Dominic whispered, "and I'll forget we're in public." Lorenzo's bodyguards reached for their weapons. Adrian smiled. "Please do." 15 red laser sights appeared on Lorenzo's security team, sniper rifles from buildings across the street, all coordinated by Silas without him even looking up from his phone. The bodyguards very slowly raised their hands. Meanwhile, Dominic released Lorenzo and turned to Serafina. His expression shattered. For all his control, all his calculated ruthlessness, Dominic looked at his pregnant sister drenched in punch on a ballroom stage, and something ancient and protective roared to life behind his eyes. "Sarah," he said softly. She burst into tears. Dominic removed his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders with astonishing gentleness. "You're safe now. I've got you." "I'm sorry," she sobbed against his chest. "I'm so sorry." "Later. Right now we're leaving." Adrian was already escorting her toward the exit when Silas spoke up casually. "Actually, we're not going anywhere yet." He finally looked up from his phone. "See, I bought this casino about 40 minutes ago. Paid triple market value for immediate transfer of ownership. Very generous of the previous owners to accept my offer so quickly." The crowd stirred. Several of Lorenzo's associates exchanged nervous glances. Lorenzo laughed, harsh and disbelieving. "You can't just buy the Verona Royale. This is neutral territory. Every family in Chicago has a stake." "Had a stake," Silas corrected. "Past tense. I bought them all out. Individually. Some were surprisingly eager to sell once they understood the alternative." The casino's massive LED screens flickered to life. Financial records scrolled across every display in the building. Bank transfers. Shell companies. Wire transactions traced through 7 countries. Murder contracts with digital signatures. Weapons deals documented with precision that made federal prosecutors weep with joy. Lorenzo's entire criminal empire exposed in real time. "What the fuck?" "Every alphabet agency in Washington received these files 12 minutes ago," Silas said. "FBI, DEA, ATF, Treasury, even sent copies to a few particularly ambitious journalists. You're trending on social media, by the way. Congratulations." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Lorenzo's allies started backing toward exits. Corrupt politicians frantically deleted contacts from their phones. Cartel representatives simply vanished into the crowd like ghosts. Loyalty evaporates when survival becomes expensive. Vivica tried slipping toward a service entrance, but Adrian blocked her path with casual efficiency. "Vivica Kane," he said pleasantly, "former prosecutor turned criminal attorney. You helped Lorenzo move assets into offshore accounts 3 months ago, right before he filed for divorce from Serafina. That makes you party to fraud and conspiracy." Her face went white. "I want my lawyer." "You are a lawyer. Probably not a very good one, though, considering you just got caught on camera destroying evidence." Adrian gestured toward the ceiling, where security feeds displayed Vivica frantically texting from her phone. She looked up at the screens in horror. Lorenzo lunged toward Dominic with a roar of pure rage. "She chose me over all of you. That means something." Dominic caught him by the throat again, this time with enough force to cut off air. "No," Dominic said with terrifying calm. "She chose love. You just exploited it." Sirens wailed in the distance. Federal agents stormed through the shattered entrance alongside tactical units in full combat gear. Red laser sights swept across the ballroom. Guests screamed and scattered like insects under sudden light. "Lorenzo DeLuca!" The lead agent's voice cut through the panic. "You're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, wire fraud, tax evasion, and illegal weapons trafficking." Lorenzo laughed once, sharp and broken. "You can't touch me. I own half the judges in this city." "Not anymore," Silas interrupted. "I bought their debt. Turns out most of them were surprisingly willing to cooperate once their financial leverage disappeared." Handcuffs snapped around Lorenzo's wrists. He looked at Serafina one last time. "You'll regret this." "No," she said quietly. "I regret the 7 years before this." Federal agents dragged him toward the exit while news helicopters circled overhead, and social media exploded with footage of Chicago's most feared crime boss being arrested in his own casino. But Silas wasn't finished. "Oh, Lorenzo," he called out. "One more thing." The mob boss turned, handcuffs gleaming under the chandeliers. "You're already married." Silence crashed over the ballroom. Serafina felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What?" Silas pulled up documents on his tablet and held it toward her reluctantly. "Isabella Reyes, Miami. You married her 6 years ago. She has 2 children, Mateo, age 4, and Sophia, age 2. They've existed the entire time you've been with Serafina." The truth hit harder than any physical violence could. Every anniversary, Every promise. Every moment she defended him against her family, built on a lie. Serafina's vision tunneled. She heard Adrian saying something about getting her to a hospital, felt Dominic's arms around her shoulders, saw federal agents dragging both Lorenzo and Vivica toward waiting vehicles. But all she could think was how thoroughly she'd destroyed herself for a man who'd never even considered her real. "The baby," she gasped. "Is fine," a paramedic assured her, checking vitals with professional efficiency. "But we should get you somewhere warm and dry." As they escorted her toward one of the Moretti SUVs, Serafina looked back at the Verona Royale one final time. The ballroom was a war zone now. Shattered glass, overturned tables, abandoned champagne glasses, and 300 criminals scrambling for exits before the feds finished processing the scene. Lorenzo had built an empire here, and her brothers had burned it down in less than an hour. Dominic helped her into the vehicle's heated interior and wrapped her in blankets while Adrian coordinated with their security team, and Silas continued orchestrating the systematic destruction of every asset Lorenzo had ever touched. "How long have you been planning this?" Serafina whispered. 5 years, Dominic admitted. "Since the day you told us to stay out of your life. You never stopped watching. We're your brothers, Sarah. We never stop." Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered through rain-streaked windows while federal agents continued hauling criminals out of the casino in waves. News vans surrounded the building. Reporters screamed questions into cameras. Somewhere in the chaos, Lorenzo's entire criminal network was imploding in real time. But inside the armored SUV, wrapped in her brother's jacket, Serafina finally felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years. Safe. The vehicle pulled away from the Verona Royale as dawn began breaking over Lake Michigan. Serafina closed her eyes and felt her daughter moving beneath her hands, alive and strong, despite everything. She'd survived Lorenzo DeLuca. Now she just had to figure out how to survive herself. Because the girl who'd walked away from her family 5 years ago no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone harder, sadder, and infinitely more dangerous. And that woman was just getting started. The Moretti penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a steel and glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. Serafina had forgotten what safety felt like until the armored elevator doors opened into a space designed for protection rather than display. Bulletproof windows. Reinforced walls, security systems that could detect threats 3 blocks away. Her brothers had built a fortress. She stumbled into the main living area, still wrapped in Dominic's jacket, dressed stiff with dried punch, hair clumped together in sticky strands. A private doctor was already waiting with a medical bag and the kind of discretion that cost extra. "Mrs. DeLuca," the doctor started. "Moretti," Serafina corrected sharply. "My name is Moretti." The doctor nodded and didn't make that mistake again. Adrian guided her toward a leather sofa while the doctor checked her vitals with efficient precision. Blood pressure elevated but stable, fetal heartbeat strong and regular. No signs of premature labor despite the trauma. The baby was fine. Serafina wasn't sure she could say the same about herself. "You need rest," the doctor said. "No stress. Proper nutrition. And someone should monitor you for the next 48 hours in case of delayed shock response." "I'll handle it," Dominic said from across the room. The doctor packed up and left with a murmured promise to return in the morning. The moment the elevator doors closed, silence crashed over the penthouse like a physical weight. Serafina sat there dripping on expensive furniture while her 3 brothers stood in various positions around the room, none of them quite looking at her. Like they'd spent 5 years planning her rescue but hadn't figured out what to say afterward. Adrian broke first. "You should shower. Get out of those clothes. In a minute. Sarah." "I said in a minute." Her voice came out harder than intended. She took a breath. "I need answers first." Silas set his phone down, the first time she'd seen him without it. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." Serafina looked between the 3 of them. "You said you've been watching me for 5 years, planning this. So tell me, how long have you known about Isabella?" The brothers exchanged glances. 4 years, Dominic admitted quietly. The number hit like a punch. 4 years. You knew Lorenzo was already married and you didn't tell me? "We tried," Adrian said. "Remember that lunch meeting 3 years ago? I flew to Chicago specifically to talk to you." She did remember. Adrian had shown up unannounced at her apartment with coffee and bagels, acting casual but radiating tension. He'd started asking careful questions about Lorenzo's travel schedule, his business associates, whether Serafina had ever met his family in Miami. She'd accused him of spying and thrown him out. "You didn't try hard enough," she whispered. "You weren't ready to hear it," Dominic replied. "Every time we brought up concerns about Lorenzo, you defended him harder, like we were the enemy instead of the man who was destroying you. So you just watched? For 4 goddamn years?" "We built a case," Silas said. "Airtight, irrefutable. Because we knew when we finally made our move, it had to end him completely. Otherwise, he'd retaliate against you." Serafina stood up too fast. The room tilted, but she steadied herself against the sofa. "You let me stay with a monster because you were worried about optics?" "We were worried about keeping you alive," Adrian shot back. "Lorenzo's killed people for less than what you just did tonight. You think we could walk in there without consequences? Without a plan that protected you?" "I didn't need protection. I needed the truth." "The truth wouldn't have convinced you." Dominic's voice cut through the argument like a blade. "You were in love with him, Sarah. Or what you thought was love. We could have shown you evidence, photographs, DNA tests proving those kids were his, and you would have found a way to rationalize it, because that's what people do when they're emotionally invested in someone who's destroying them." The accuracy of that statement stole her breath. Because he was right. 3 years ago, if Adrian had shown up with proof of Isabella, Serafina would have convinced herself it was fake. Photoshopped. A setup orchestrated by her controlling brothers who couldn't stand that she'd chosen her own life. She would have doubled down on Lorenzo out of sheer stubbornness. "I hate that you're right," she whispered. Dominic's expression softened slightly. "I know." Serafina sank back onto the sofa, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. "I gave him 7 years. I defended him against you. I cut you out of my life because I thought you were trying to control me." "You were 23, Adrian said. "You wanted independence. That's normal." "I wanted to prove I wasn't just a spoiled rich girl playing at real life." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out I was exactly that, just with worse judgment." Silas moved to the bar and poured something amber into a crystal glass. He brought it to Dominic, then poured water for Serafina. "You're being too hard on yourself." "Am I? I abandoned my family for a married criminal who humiliated me in front of 300 people for fun." She took the water glass with shaking hands. "That seems like something worth being hard on myself about." "He manipulated you," Dominic said. "That's what men like Lorenzo do. They find women who are smart and strong and independent, and they convince them that choosing him is an act of rebellion instead of self-destruction." "When did you become a therapist?" "When I spent 5 years watching my sister disappear into someone else's nightmare." The words hung in the air between them. Outside the windows, Chicago was waking up. Dawn light spread across Lake Michigan while news helicopters circled the Verona Royale, and social media exploded with footage of Lorenzo's arrest. Serafina's humiliation was going viral in real time. Videos of her drenched in punch, photos of federal agents dragging Lorenzo away in handcuffs, speculation about the Moretti brothers' dramatic rescue. Her life had become entertainment. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "The media coverage." Adrian pulled out his phone and scrolled through alerts with clinical detachment. "Trending worldwide. 6 different hashtags. CNN already has a panel discussing organized crime's treatment of women. Fox is spinning it as an immigrant crime story somehow. TMZ paid someone $20,000 for cell phone footage." "Of course they did." "We can control the narrative," Silas offered. "I've got 3 PR firms on standby waiting for instructions. We could frame this as a rescue, a family reconciliation, whatever story you want to tell." "I don't want to tell any story. I want to disappear." "Not an option," Dominic said flatly. "Lorenzo's allies are going to be looking for leverage. The second you step outside without protection, you become a target." Serafina felt the walls closing in. "So I'm a prisoner now? Just a different cage?" "Your family," Adrian corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" The question landed harder than she intended. Her brothers went quiet, each processing the accusation in their own way. Dominic's jaw tightened. Adrian looked away. Silas returned to his phone like it might offer answers the room couldn't provide. "I'm going to shower," Serafina said finally. "Before I say something I'll actually regret." Nobody stopped her. She found the guest suite exactly as she remembered from childhood. Soft carpets, warm lighting, a bathroom bigger than her first apartment. Someone had already laid out clean clothes in her size. Probably Dominic. He'd always been terrifyingly efficient about details. The hot water felt like absolution. Serafina stood under the rainfall shower and scrubbed punch residue from her hair, her skin, the corners of her fingernails. She scrubbed until her skin turned pink, until the water ran clear, until she couldn't smell the sickly sweet cherry scent anymore. But she couldn't wash away the memory. Lorenzo's voice, the crowd's laughter, the camera flashes. The moment she'd realized that 7 years of loyalty meant absolutely nothing to a man who'd married someone else while promising her forever. She pressed her forehead against the tile and let herself cry. Not the broken sobs from earlier. This was different, quieter. The kind of crying that comes from deep exhaustion rather than fresh pain. She cried for the girl who'd walked away from her family, believing it made her strong. She cried for the woman who'd spent 7 years making excuses for cruelty. She cried for her daughter, who would grow up knowing her father was a monster serving life sentences in federal prison. When the water finally ran cold, Serafina dried off and dressed in clothes that actually fit. Soft leggings, an oversized sweater. Nothing that reminded her of the life she'd just escaped. She found Dominic alone in the kitchen, making coffee with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for dismantling enemy corporations. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He glanced up. "Could ask you the same thing. My sleep schedule's been garbage for months." She slid onto a bar stool and watched him work. Lorenzo preferred late nights, business meetings at 2 a.m., phone calls at 4. By the time I adjusted to his schedule, I forgot what normal felt like. Dominic set a mug of decaf in front of her. That was intentional. Sleep deprivation makes people easier to control. "You've really thought about this." "I've thought about nothing else for 5 years." They drank in silence while dawn light filled the penthouse. Outside, the city looked almost peaceful. You couldn't see the corruption or violence from this high up. Just glass and steel and the lake stretching toward the horizon. "I'm sorry," Serafina said quietly. Dominic looked at her. "For what?" "For cutting you out. For choosing Lorenzo. For being so goddamn stubborn that you had to spend 5 years building a case just to save me from myself. You don't need to apologize for being manipulated. I need to apologize for hurting you." She met his eyes. "That lunch with Adrian 3 years ago? I said terrible things. I told him you were all controlling assholes who couldn't stand that I didn't need you anymore. I said..." Her voice cracked. "I said I wished I'd been born into a different family." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "Did you mean it?" "At the time, yes. Now..." She shook her head. "Now I realize I'm the luckiest person alive to have brothers who loved me enough to wait until I was ready to come home. We would have waited longer if necessary." "I know. That's what makes it worse." The elevator chimed. Adrian emerged carrying bags from what was probably Chicago's most expensive breakfast place. He distributed food with military precision, fresh fruit for Serafina, croissants for Dominic, something green and virtuous for himself. "Silas is handling the legal fallout," Adrian announced. "Lorenzo's being transferred to federal holding. Vivica's already talking to prosecutors about a deal. And approximately 47 of Lorenzo's former associates have reached out wanting to negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony." 47? Serafina repeated. "Loyalty's expensive when you're facing RICO charges." She picked at her fruit without appetite. "What happens now? Legally? Lorenzo's facing multiple life sentences. The feds have everything. Financial records, communication logs, witness testimony. His lawyers are already floating plea deals, but the DOJ isn't interested." "And Isabella?" Adrian's expression darkened. "Complicated. She claims she didn't know about you, says Lorenzo told her you were a business associate. Her lawyers are arguing she's a victim too." "Is she? Maybe. Or maybe she's just smarter than we gave her credit for." Adrian sat across from her. "The kids are definitely his, though. DNA confirmed it yesterday." Serafina felt something cold settle in her chest. "He has children. Real children. While I was..." She gestured at her pregnant belly. "What does that make mine?" "Loved," Dominic said firmly. "That's what it makes her." "Her?" "The ultrasound tech mentioned it to the doctor last night. I assumed you knew. A daughter. She was having a daughter." Serafina should have felt joy, or excitement, or maternal warmth. Instead, she just felt numb. Her daughter would grow up with Lorenzo's DNA, his bone structure, maybe his eyes or his smile. Every time Serafina looked at her, she'd remember the man who'd destroyed her for sport. "I can't do this," she whispered. Adrian leaned forward. "Can't do what?" "Any of it. Be a mother. Face the media. Testify against Lorenzo. I can't." Her breathing accelerated. "Everyone's going to know. They're going to see those videos and think I'm pathetic. A rich girl who got exactly what she deserved for slumming with criminals. And my daughter, she'll grow up with that story following her everywhere. Your mom was so stupid she married a bigamist mob boss. How do I protect her from that?" "One day at a time," Dominic said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer that matters right now." Serafina wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She ate her fruit mechanically while her brothers coordinated security details and legal strategies around her. They moved like a machine, efficient, relentless, terrifyingly competent. This was what they did. They solved impossible problems and crushed obstacles that stood in their way. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have that kind of power on her side. Around noon, Silas returned with a tablet full of documents requiring signatures, restraining orders, witness protection protocols, asset freezes on Lorenzo's accounts. Serafina signed everything without reading it, trusting her brothers in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years. "There's one more thing," Silas said carefully. Something in his tone made her look up. "What?" "Lorenzo's requesting to see you." The room went silent. "Absolutely not," Dominic said immediately. "He claims he has information about threats against her, says he'll only share it face to face." Adrian's expression turned lethal. "It's a manipulation tactic." "Obviously," Silas agreed. "But the prosecutors think it might be legitimate. Lorenzo's made enemies. Some of them might try using Serafina as leverage now that he's in custody." "Then they can communicate through lawyers," Dominic said flatly. "She's not going anywhere near him." "I'll do it," Serafina heard herself say. 3 sets of eyes turned toward her. "Absolutely not," Dominic repeated. "He's going to keep pushing until he gets what he wants. You know how he operates." She set down her fork. "If I meet with him once, under controlled conditions, maybe he'll finally leave me alone." "Or he'll manipulate you again," Adrian countered. "That's what abusers do, Sarah. They create emergencies that only they can solve. They position themselves as necessary even when they're the actual threat." "I'm aware." "Are you? Because 12 hours ago you were still defending him." The accusation stung because it was true. Even drenched in punch, humiliated in front of hundreds, part of her had still wanted to believe Lorenzo loved her, that his cruelty came from pain rather than malice. She wasn't that person anymore. "I need to do this," she said quietly. "For me. I need to look him in the eye and know that I'm done, that he doesn't control me anymore." Dominic studied her for a long moment. "This is a mistake." "Probably, but it's my mistake to make." He didn't like it. She could see that in the tension around his eyes, the way his hands curled into fists against the counter, but eventually he nodded. "Fine, but I'm coming with you. Non-negotiable." "So am I," Adrian added. Silas coordinated with the federal prosecutors while Serafina tried to prepare herself mentally for seeing Lorenzo again. She showered a second time, changed into clothes that made her feel armored, black slacks, a crisp white blouse, her mother's diamond earrings that she'd kept hidden from Lorenzo for 7 years. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The girl who'd fallen in love with a dangerous street enforcer no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone harder, someone who understood that survival sometimes meant walking back into the nightmare you'd barely escaped. The federal holding facility was a concrete fortress designed to contain monsters. Security clearance took 40 minutes, multiple checkpoints, metal detectors, background verification. They confiscated everything except the clothes on her back. A federal marshal escorted them through sterile hallways that smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Dominic walked on her right, Adrian on her left, both moving like bodyguards despite the armed guards surrounding them. The visitation room was small, gray walls, a metal table, 2 chairs bolted to the floor, a pane of reinforced glass separating visitors from inmates. Lorenzo was already waiting. He looked smaller somehow. Prison jumpsuit instead of tailored suits. No cologne or styling products. Tattoos visible on his neck without expensive fabric to hide them. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, searching for weakness. Serafina sat down across from him while Dominic and Adrian flanked her like sentinels. A federal prosecutor stood in the corner with a recording device. Lorenzo smiled. "Hey, baby." The casual endearment made her skin crawl. "Don't call me that. What should I call you, Mrs. DeLuca?" "Serafina. If you have to call me anything." He leaned back in his chair with exaggerated ease. "You look good. Motherhood agrees with you." "You didn't request this meeting to compliment me." "No, I requested it because I actually give a shit about keeping you alive." He glanced at Dominic. "Unlike your brothers who paraded you around that casino like bait." "You humiliated her first," Dominic said quietly. "I was teaching her a lesson." "By destroying her in public?" Lorenzo's smile widened. She needed to understand her place. Serafina felt her brothers tense on either side of her. Before things could escalate, she spoke up. "What threats?" she asked. "The prosecutor said you have information." Lorenzo's attention snapped back to her. "Marcus Volkov." The name meant nothing to Serafina, but she saw Dominic's expression change. "What about him?" Dominic demanded. "He's coming for her," Lorenzo said simply. "And you rich assholes have no idea how to protect her from someone like him." "Explain," the federal prosecutor ordered. Lorenzo settled into his chair like he was holding court instead of facing life in prison. "Marcus runs the Eastern European trafficking networks. Girls, weapons, pharmaceuticals, doesn't matter. If it's illegal and profitable, he's moving it. I had a business arrangement with him until your brothers decided to play hero." "What kind of arrangement?" the prosecutor pressed. "The kind I'm not discussing without immunity." Lorenzo looked at Serafina. "But I'll tell you this for free. Marcus invested heavily in my operations. Tens of millions. When the feds froze my accounts, they froze his money too." Serafina's stomach dropped. "So he blames me." "He blames everyone involved in my arrest. But you're the easiest target. Pregnant, vulnerable, high profile. Hurting you sends a message." "This is manipulation," Adrian said flatly. "Classic abuser playbook. Create a threat so he can position himself as the solution." "Believe what you want," Lorenzo shot back. "But Marcus has resources your family can't touch. Russian mob connections, military contractors, people who make your private security teams look like mall cops." Dominic's voice cut through the tension like ice. "If you actually cared about protecting her, you wouldn't have humiliated her in the first place." Lorenzo laughed, short and bitter. "I loved her." "No," Serafina said quietly. "You loved controlling me." "Same thing." "It's really not." His expression shifted, something darker flickering behind the calculated charm. "You think you're free now? That running back to your brothers makes you independent? You just traded one cage for another, baby. At least with me you had passion, purpose. Now you're just another Moretti princess locked in her tower. I'd rather be locked in a tower than drowning in your bullshit." The words came out harder than she intended. Lorenzo's mask finally cracked. Rage flashed across his face, raw and undisguised, before he controlled it. "You're going to regret this," he said softly. "Is that a threat?" the prosecutor asked immediately. "It's a fact." Lorenzo leaned toward the glass. "When Marcus comes for you, and he will, you're going to realize I was the only one who could have protected you. Your brothers have money. I have connections in places money can't reach." "We're done here," Dominic said, standing. But Lorenzo wasn't finished. "Isabella sends her regards, by the way." Serafina froze halfway to standing. "What?" "My wife. Our kids. She's handling things beautifully while I'm indisposed. Very understanding woman. Not dramatic like you. The casual cruelty shouldn't have hurt after everything else. But it did. Because even now, arrested, facing life sentences, stripped of his empire, Lorenzo still knew exactly how to find the soft places and press until they broke. "Let's go," Adrian said, hand on her elbow. Serafina let them guide her out, while Lorenzo's voice followed. "You can't run far enough, Sarah. Not from me. Not from what's coming." The door slammed shut behind them. Serafina made it 3 steps down the hallway before her knees gave out. Dominic caught her before she hit the floor, arms strong and certain, while federal marshals looked away politely. "Breathe," he murmured. "Just breathe." But she couldn't, because Lorenzo was right about one thing. She'd just traded one kind of dependence for another. Running back to her brothers wasn't freedom. It was admitting she'd been wrong about everything for 7 years. And somewhere out there, a man named Marcus Volkov was planning to hurt her for crimes she didn't commit. "Is it real?" she gasped. "The threat?" Adrian's expression told her everything. "We'll handle it." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now." Outside, Chicago's afternoon sun felt cruel and bright after the holding facility's fluorescent gloom. They loaded into the armored SUV in silence while Silas coordinated security updates through encrypted channels. Serafina stared out the window watching ordinary people live ordinary lives, grabbing coffee, catching buses, laughing with friends, none of them pregnant and hunted by Russian traffickers because they'd been stupid enough to fall in love with a monster. "I want to disappear," she said quietly. "Not happening," Dominic replied. "Why not?" "Witness protection. New identity. I could start over somewhere he'd never find me." "Because running doesn't solve the problem. It just delays it." He turned toward her. "We're going to handle Marcus the same way we handled Lorenzo, completely. And if you can't, then we die trying." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it just reminded her how much destruction she'd brought to her family's door. 7 years ago, she'd walked away believing she didn't need them. Now they were preparing to go to war to keep her alive. Back at the penthouse, Silas had transformed the main living area into a war room. Laptop computers, surveillance feeds, a digital whiteboard mapping Lorenzo's criminal network and Marcus Volkov's known associates. "Tell me everything," Dominic ordered. Silas pulled up files with clinical efficiency. Marcus Volkov, age 46, born in Moscow, former intelligence officer turned organized crime entrepreneur, specializes in trafficking networks across 17 countries. Net worth estimated between 2 and 4 billion, most of it hidden through shell corporations. Photos flashed across the screen. A tall man with cold eyes and silver hair at his temples. Expensive suits, private jets, charity galas where he posed with politicians who should have known better. "He's been moving product through Lorenzo's infrastructure for 8 years, Silas continued. The federal seizure trapped approximately 60 million of his operational capital in frozen accounts. That's not enough to destroy him, but it's enough to make him extremely angry." "What's his reputation?" Adrian asked. "Ruthless, methodical, patient. He doesn't make threats. He makes examples. Last year, a Ukrainian prosecutor tried investigating his operations. She disappeared along with her husband and their 2 children. Bodies were never found." Serafina felt bile rising in her throat. "Children?" "Marcus doesn't believe in partial measures." The room tilted. Serafina grabbed the nearest chair and lowered herself into it carefully. Her daughter moved inside her, blissfully unaware that her mother had painted a target on both of them. "How do we stop him?" she whispered. "We don't," Silas said. "We negotiate." "Absolutely not," Dominic snapped. "Listen to me. Marcus operates like a businessman. Everything's transactional. If we can replace his losses and provide alternative infrastructure, he has no reason to retaliate. You want to pay him off? I want to keep Sarah alive." The argument erupted across the penthouse. Dominic insisting they couldn't negotiate with terrorists, Adrian pointing out that Marcus wasn't technically a terrorist so much as an extremely violent entrepreneur, Silas running numbers on what kind of compensation might satisfy a crime lord who'd just lost $60 million. Serafina listened to them tear each other apart defending her. This was her fault, every bit of it. She'd chosen Lorenzo, she'd ignored warnings. She'd cut her family out of her life. And now they were preparing to either go to war or bankrupt themselves to clean up her mess. "Stop," she said quietly. Nobody heard her. "Stop." The penthouse went silent. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. "This is my problem," Serafina said. "Not yours. I'll figure it out." "How exactly?" Dominic demanded. "I don't know yet, but I'm not letting you start a war with Russian mobsters because I was stupid enough to marry the wrong man." "You're not stupid." "Yes, I am." The words exploded out of her. "I am stupid and stubborn, and I destroyed my entire life for someone who was already married. I gave up my family for a man who threw punch on me while I was pregnant. So don't stand here telling me I'm not stupid when we both know that's exactly what I am." Her voice cracked on the last word. Adrian moved towards her, but she held up a hand. "Don't. Please. I can't handle you being nice to me right now. Sarah, I need air." She walked toward the balcony on shaking legs while her brothers watched helplessly. The glass doors opened onto a terrace overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. Wind whipped her hair back and cut through her sweater. 40 stories below, traffic crawled through evening rush hour. Ordinary problems. Ordinary lives. Serafina stood at the railing and wondered how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. Behind her, the balcony door slid open. She knew without looking that it was Dominic. "You okay?" he asked. "No." "Fair enough." They stood in silence while the city hummed below them. Finally, Serafina spoke. "Do you remember when Mom died?" Dominic went still. They never talked about their mother. "I remember. I was 16, convinced I could handle everything myself because asking for help felt like weakness." She turned to face him. "That's what Lorenzo exploited. That stupid teenage impulse to prove I didn't need anyone. He made dependence feel like love and independence feel like betrayal. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I fell for it. You were 23. He was a professional manipulator." Serafina looked back at the city. "I'm having his child, Dom. His daughter is going to grow up knowing her father was a monster, that her mother was too blind to see it until it was too late. She's also going to grow up knowing her mother survived. That matters more." "Does it?" "Yes." The conviction in his voice made her chest tight. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone believe in her when she couldn't believe in herself. "Marcus is really coming?" she asked quietly. "Probably. Can you stop him?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, but I'm going to try. And if you can't, then we run. All of us. New identities, new lives, whatever it takes." Serafina turned to look at him. Really look at him. Her oldest brother who'd raised her after their mother died. Who'd taught her to ride a bike and check contracts and read balance sheets. Who'd spent 5 years watching her destroy herself and never stopped trying to bring her home. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know. I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do." Inside the penthouse, Silas's phone rang with an encrypted tone. He answered it on speaker. "This is Volkov," a heavily accented voice said. Every muscle in Serafina's body locked. "I understand Lorenzo's pregnant whore is looking for me," the voice continued pleasantly. "How convenient. I am looking for her too. Perhaps we should meet and discuss this situation like civilized people." Dominic's expression turned lethal. "Not happening." "No? Such a shame. I had hoped the Moretti family would be more reasonable than their former brother-in-law. But if you prefer to do this the difficult way—" "What do you want?" Silas asked. "What I want is my $60 million returned. What I will accept is a conversation with Mrs. DeLuca. Alone, tomorrow evening. I will send the location." "She's not meeting you," Dominic said flatly. "Then I kill her entire family, starting with the daughter she has not yet birthed. Your choice." The line went dead. Silence crashed over the penthouse. Serafina felt her daughter moving inside her and realized with absolute clarity that she had finally reached the point where there was no going back. She could run and let Marcus hunt her family, or she could walk into the nightmare herself. "I'm doing it," she said. "No," Dominic started. "He just threatened my daughter, my unborn daughter. So yes, I'm meeting him, and you're going to help me prepare for it." Her brother stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But for the first time since standing drenched in punch on that casino stage, Serafina Moretti felt something besides shame. She felt rage. And tomorrow evening, Marcus Volkov was going to learn exactly what happened when you threatened a Moretti's child. 24 hours to prepare for a meeting with a man who killed families for sport. The Moretti penthouse transformed into a tactical operations center overnight. Security consultants arrived in waves, former intelligence operatives, bodyguards who'd protected heads of state, technology specialists who could turn a ballroom into a fortress. They moved through the space with quiet efficiency, while Serafina sat in the center of controlled chaos, watching her brothers wage war on her behalf. Dominic coordinated with private military contractors who owed him favors. Adrian mapped escape routes through buildings Serafina had never heard of. Silas worked his network of information brokers trying to find leverage against a man who seemed untouchable. Nobody slept. Around 3 in the morning, Serafina found herself alone in the kitchen, staring at herbal tea she had no intention of drinking. Her daughter moved restlessly inside her like she could sense her mother's fear. "I'm sorry," Serafina whispered to her belly. "I'm so sorry I brought you into this." "Talking to yourself now?" She looked up to find Adrian leaning against the doorframe, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Talking to her," Serafina corrected. "She deserves an apology." Adrian poured himself coffee that was probably his sixth cup of the night. "You didn't create this situation, didn't I? I married Lorenzo. I ignored every warning. This is exactly the life I chose." "No, you chose love. Lorenzo weaponized it. There's a difference." Serafina wanted to believe that. But at 3 in the morning, with a meeting scheduled in 15 hours, self-forgiveness felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "What if this is a trap?" she asked quietly. "It's definitely a trap." "Then why are we walking into it?" Adrian set his coffee down and met her eyes. "Because the alternative is letting Marcus dictate terms from a position of strength. This way we control the environment, the timeline, the witnesses. We turn his trap into ours. And if it doesn't work, then we have 12 backup plans." Despite everything, Serafina almost smiled. 12? Dominic insisted on 15, but I talked him down. This time she did smile, brief and exhausted, but real. Her brothers were preparing for war while she sat drinking tea and apologizing to her unborn daughter. The absurdity of it cut through some of her fear. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Do what?" "Walk into a room with a man who wants me dead and pretend I'm not terrified." Adrian moved to sit across from her. "You don't have to pretend. Fear is useful. It keeps you sharp, aware. Lorenzo tried to convince you that fear was weakness. It's not. It's survival instinct. Trust it." "Lorenzo," Serafina repeated bitterly. "Even locked up, he's still destroying my life." "Only if you let him." The words hung between them while the penthouse hummed with activity in other rooms. Serafina traced patterns on her tea mug and tried to imagine walking into Marcus Volkov's presence without falling apart. "Tell me about him," she said. "Everything you know." Adrian pulled out his phone and brought up files. Marcus Volkov grew up in Moscow during the collapse of the Soviet Union. His father was KGB, mother was a concert pianist. He studied economics at Moscow State University, recruited into intelligence services at 23. Worked in counterintelligence until the late 90s when he went private. Photos scrolled past. A younger Marcus in military uniform, then business suits, then expensive casual wear at yacht parties with oligarchs and politicians. "He's smart," Adrian continued. "Methodical, patient. Most criminals operate on impulse and ego. Marcus operates like he's running a Fortune 500 company. Quarterly projections, risk assessment, long-term strategic planning." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "It means he's predictable. Men like Lorenzo are dangerous because they're emotional. They make decisions based on pride or rage. Marcus makes decisions based on profit and loss. If we can convince him that killing you costs more than it benefits him, he'll walk away. And if we can't?" Adrian's expression darkened. "Then we kill him first." The casual way he said it reminded Serafina that her brothers weren't just wealthy businessmen. They'd built empires in industries where violence was currency and mercy was weakness. She'd forgotten that, or maybe she'd never let herself see it clearly. "Have you killed people before?" The question came out before she could stop it. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes." "Then yes. 3 times. All in self-defense or defense of others. All investigated by appropriate authorities and cleared." He met her eyes. "I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. Sometimes survival means doing terrible things." Serafina absorbed that information while her daughter kicked against her ribs. "I used to think I was brave," she said quietly. "Walking away from the family, choosing Lorenzo, defending him against everyone who tried to warn me. I thought that was courage." "What do you think it was?" "Cowardice dressed as independence. I was so afraid of being controlled that I let someone else control me completely. I just didn't recognize it because he made it feel like freedom." Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. "You were 23. You're allowed to make mistakes." "This mistake might get my daughter killed." "No, Marcus Volkov might try to kill your daughter. That's his choice, not yours. Don't take ownership of other people's evil." The distinction should have helped. Instead, it just made her feel more powerless. By dawn, the plan was finalized. Marcus had sent coordinates for a warehouse in Chicago's industrial district. Abandoned, isolated, perfect for an ambush. Silas had purchased the building through a shell corporation 6 hours earlier and filled it with surveillance equipment. Adrian's security team would position sharpshooters in surrounding buildings. Dominic would accompany Serafina inside while backup teams waited in armored vehicles. It was as safe as walking into a trap could be. Serafina showered and dressed like she was preparing for battle. Black slacks, fitted blazer, comfortable shoes in case she needed to run. She pulled her hair back severely and applied minimal makeup. The goal wasn't to look attractive, it was to look competent, untouchable, like someone who couldn't be intimidated. She looked in the mirror and saw someone pretending to be brave. It would have to be enough. The warehouse sat on the edge of Lake Michigan, where industrial Chicago met abandoned infrastructure. Graffiti covered the walls, broken windows stared like empty eyes, exactly the kind of place where people disappeared. The armored SUV pulled up to a side entrance at exactly 6 p.m. Serafina's hands shook so badly she had to clench them in her lap. "You can still back out," Dominic said quietly. "No, I can't." "Yes, you can. We'll find another way." Serafina looked at her oldest brother. "He threatened my daughter, Dom. My unborn daughter. There is no backing out from that." He searched her face for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's go meet the devil." They exited the vehicle into cold evening air. Adrian's voice crackled through the earpiece hidden beneath Serafina's hair. "All positions confirmed. You're covered from 6 angles. Thermal imaging shows 3 heat signatures inside. Marcus plus 2 associates. No additional threats detected." "Copy," Dominic murmured. They entered the warehouse through a rusted metal door that groaned in protest. Inside, the space opened into a vast emptiness punctuated by support columns and shadows. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow-green. Marcus Volkov waited in the center of the space like a spider in his web. He was taller than his photos suggested. 6'4" of understated menace in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most cars. Silver hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a diplomat or a professor, distinguished, intelligent, utterly cold. 2 bodyguards flanked him, Eastern European, built like tanks, hands resting near concealed weapons. "Mrs. DeLuca," Marcus said pleasantly, "how kind of you to accept my invitation." "Moretti," Serafina corrected. "My name is Moretti." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. My apologies." They stood 15 feet apart, studying each other across concrete and shadows. Serafina forced herself to hold his gaze even as every survival instinct screamed at her to run. "You wanted to meet," she said. "We're here." "Indeed." Marcus gestured toward a folding table someone had set up. 2 chairs, a bottle of vodka, and 3 glasses. "Please, sit. We are civilized people having a civilized conversation." Dominic's hand found the small of Serafina's back, reassuring pressure reminding her she wasn't alone. They approached the table carefully while Marcus poured vodka with ceremonial precision. "I don't drink," Serafina said. "I know. You are pregnant. Congratulations." He slid the glass toward Dominic instead. "Your brother will drink for you then, to toast our agreement." "We haven't agreed to anything," Dominic replied. "Not yet, but we will." Marcus settled into his chair with aristocratic ease. "Lorenzo DeLuca was my business partner for 8 years. A mutually profitable arrangement until your family destroyed it." "Lorenzo destroyed himself," Serafina said. "Perhaps. But the federal seizure of his assets trapped $60 million of my operational capital. That is not something I can simply write off as bad luck." "We can replace it," Dominic offered. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think this is about money? I have money, Mr. Moretti, more than your family despite your impressive portfolio. This is about principle, about sending a message that disrupting my operations carries consequences." Serafina's stomach dropped. "You are always going to kill me. This meeting is just theater." "No, this meeting is an opportunity." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I could kill you, quite easily despite your brother's precautions. But corpses are poor bargaining chips. Living hostages, however." "She's not your hostage," Dominic said quietly. "Not yet." The 2 bodyguards shifted position almost imperceptibly. In Serafina's ear, Adrian's voice crackled urgently. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north, at least 6 SUVs. This is a setup. Get out now. Before Dominic could respond, the warehouse's loading dock doors exploded inward. Armed men poured through the opening, at least 20 of them, automatic weapons raised, moving with military precision. Not Marcus's men, someone else's. Serafina's mind went blank with terror. Dominic grabbed her and shoved her behind a support column as gunfire erupted across the warehouse. The 2 bodyguards who'd flanked Marcus opened fire, while Marcus himself dropped to the ground with practiced ease. "Extraction team moving in," Adrian's voice shouted through the chaos. "Hold position!" But there was nowhere to hold. Bullets shredded concrete. Fluorescent lights exploded in cascades of sparks. Dominic returned fire with a weapon Serafina hadn't even known he was carrying, while she pressed herself against cold concrete and wrapped her arms around her pregnant belly. Through the chaos, she saw Marcus sprint toward a service exit with inhuman speed. Then everything went silent. Not quiet. Silent, like someone had cut the audio. Serafina's ears rang. Smoke filled the warehouse. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, some moving, some not. She couldn't tell who was who. "Dom?" she gasped. He appeared through the smoke, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "I'm here. Are you hurt?" "No. What just happened?" "Ambush. Not Marcus's, though." He pulled her to her feet. "We need to move." But before they could take 3 steps, a figure emerged from the smoke. Lorenzo. Serafina's mind couldn't process it. Lorenzo was in federal custody. Lorenzo was locked up. Lorenzo wasn't supposed to be here. He stood 10 feet away wearing civilian clothes instead of a prison jumpsuit, holding a gun like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "Hey, baby," he said with that familiar predatory smile. "Miss me?" "How?" she started. "How am I here? Turns out federal holding has exploitable weaknesses when you know the right people." He gestured around the warehouse. "And I know a lot of people." Dominic moved to stand between Lorenzo and Serafina. "You need to leave. Now." "No." "See, I've been thinking." Lorenzo circled them slowly. "You Morettis destroyed my empire, took my money, put me in a cage, all because you thought your sister was too good for me." "She is," Dominic said flatly. Lorenzo laughed. "Maybe, but she's also carrying my daughter, and that changes things." Serafina's blood went cold. "You don't get to claim her." "I don't need to claim her. I just need to make sure you understand something." He raised the gun, pointing it directly at her stomach. "That child is mine, my blood, my legacy. And if I can't have my empire, I'll settle for making sure she never forgets what her father was." "Lorenzo, please." "Shut up." The casual cruelty in his voice cut like a blade. "You humiliated me, Sarah. Stood there in that federal facility and looked at me like I was nothing, like 7 years meant nothing. 7 years of lies. Much small. 7 years of me building something from nothing, and you destroyed it because your brothers convinced you I wasn't good enough." His voice rose to a shout that echoed through the warehouse. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with me. We're going to disappear, and you're going to raise our daughter to understand exactly what you cost me." "Over my dead body," Dominic said. "That can be arranged." Lorenzo fired. The gunshot sounded like the end of the world. Dominic staggered backward, blood blooming across his shoulder. Serafina screamed and caught him before he fell. "Dom!" "I'm okay," he gasped. "It's just—" Lorenzo grabbed Serafina by her hair and yanked her away from her brother. She screamed and clawed at his hand, but he was stronger, dragging her backward toward one of the exits. "Let her go!" Adrian's voice cut through the chaos as he burst through a side entrance, weapon raised. Lorenzo pressed his gun against Serafina's temple. "Take another step and I paint the walls with her brain." Adrian froze. Everything froze. Serafina could feel her daughter moving inside her, could smell Lorenzo's familiar cologne mixed with gunpowder and sweat, could hear Dominic struggling to breathe behind her. This was it. The moment she'd been terrified of since that night in the casino. Lorenzo had her, and no amount of money or planning or private security could change that. "Please," she whispered. "Lorenzo, please don't do this." "Should have thought of that before you betrayed me." He started dragging her toward the exit when Marcus Volkov stepped out of the shadows like a ghost. Mr. DeLuca, he said pleasantly. How unexpected. Lorenzo spun, keeping Serafina in front of him as a shield. Back off, Volkov. This is between me and my family. I'm afraid not. Marcus pulled out his own weapon with casual efficiency. You see, Mrs. DeLuca was supposed to be my leverage. I went to considerable effort arranging this meeting. You don't get to simply steal my asset. Serafina's mind reeled. She was being fought over like property by two monsters who viewed her as a means to an end. She's my wife, Lorenzo snarled. She was your wife, past tense, and that child she carries, Marcus gestured toward Serafina's stomach. That child represents quite a lot of potential leverage against the Moretti family. I suspect they would pay handsomely for her safe return. The words hit Serafina like physical blows. This had never been about $60 million. Marcus had planned this from the beginning. The meeting. The ambush. He'd known Lorenzo would escape. He'd orchestrated the entire situation to create maximum chaos and position himself as the only solution. You're working together? She breathed. Both men smiled. Not working together, Marcus corrected. More like parallel interests that occasionally align. Lorenzo wanted revenge. I wanted leverage. The federal government's incompetence provided opportunity. You helped him escape. I made a few phone calls, greased a few palms. American justice system is remarkably fragile when properly pressured. Lorenzo's grip on her hair tightened. Doesn't matter who planned what. She's leaving with me. I think not. Marcus raised his weapon and fired. The bullet caught Lorenzo in the leg. He went down with a howl of pain, releasing Serafina. She stumbled forward and Adrian was there immediately, pulling her behind cover while Marcus's men flooded the warehouse. Serafina watched through tears as Lorenzo was dragged to his feet, blood streaming from his leg, held between two of Marcus's guards. You son of a bitch, Lorenzo screamed. Marcus brushed imaginary dust from his sleeve. You are useful, Mr. DeLuca, but not irreplaceable. Mrs. Moretti, however. He turned his attention to Serafina. She is quite valuable indeed. Adrian had his weapon trained on Marcus, but 3 red laser dots appeared on his chest immediately. Snipers from positions Serafina couldn't see. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Marcus had won. Here is my offer, he said pleasantly. Mrs. Moretti comes with me voluntarily. I keep her comfortable and safe until her brothers deliver $200 million. Once I receive payment, everyone goes home alive. And if we refuse, Adrian demanded, then I kill you, then Dominic, then Silas, then every person Mrs. Moretti has ever cared about. And finally, I take her anyway. He smiled. The question is not whether she comes with me. The question is how many people die first. Serafina looked at Adrian's pale face, at Dominic struggling to stand despite his gunshot wound, at Lorenzo bleeding on the warehouse floor. Every path led to the same destination. She could fight and watch her brothers die. Or she could surrender and maybe buy them enough time to mount a rescue. I'll go, she heard herself say. Sarah, no, Adrian started. I'll go, she repeated more firmly. But you let my brothers leave. Now, that's the deal. Marcus studied her for a long moment. You have more spine than I expected. Very well, your brothers may leave. You have my word. Your word means nothing, Dominic snarled. Perhaps, but it is all you have at the moment. Marcus gestured toward the exit. Go, before I change my mind. Adrian looked at Serafina with devastation written across his face. We will find you. I know. Days, not weeks, days. I know, she repeated. She watched her brothers retreat through the warehouse exit, Adrian supporting Dominic, both of them looking back at her with expressions that would haunt her forever. Then the exit doors closed, and she was alone with monsters. Marcus approached her with exaggerated gentleness. Come, Mrs. Moretti, we have much to discuss. One of his guards zip-tied her hands in front of her, not tight enough to hurt, but secure enough to eliminate any hope of escape. They guided her toward a black SUV idling near the loading dock. Serafina climbed inside mechanically, her mind screaming protest while her body moved on autopilot. The door slammed shut. Through the tinted window, she saw Marcus speaking to Lorenzo, words she couldn't hear. Then one of Marcus's men raised a weapon and shot Lorenzo twice in the chest. Serafina screamed against the glass. Lorenzo fell to the warehouse floor and didn't move again. Whatever he'd been, monster, manipulator, abuser, he was gone. Dead. The father of her child executed like livestock while she watched helpless. Marcus climbed into the SUV beside her with the casual ease of someone who'd just finished a business transaction. "You killed him," Serafina gasped. "He was a liability, and a remarkably stupid man for thinking he could negotiate with me." Marcus fastened his seatbelt. "Don't mourn him. He would have killed you eventually." The vehicle pulled away from the warehouse while Serafina's mind fractured. Lorenzo was dead. She was a hostage. Her brothers had been forced to abandon her. And somewhere in her womb, her daughter moved restlessly, blissfully unaware that her mother had just lost everything. The SUV merged into Chicago traffic, while Marcus made phone calls in rapid Russian. Serafina stared out the window, watching the city she'd lived in for 7 years slip past like a dream. They drove for what felt like hours but was probably 40 minutes. Industrial District gave way to suburbs, then Forest Preserve. The SUV turned onto a private road that wound through trees until they reached a compound hidden behind walls and security gates. Serafina was escorted inside a mansion that looked like it belonged in a European castle film. Marble, chandeliers, oil paintings worth more than most houses, all of it designed to intimidate. A woman in nurse's scrubs waited in what appeared to be a medical suite. She checked Serafina's vitals, confirmed the baby was healthy, then left without speaking. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "You will be comfortable here, fed well, given excellent medical care. I am not a barbarian." "You're a kidnapper." "I am a businessman making a transaction." He gestured toward the suite. "This is your room, ensuite bathroom, television, books, anything you need within reason." "Freedom? That is not within reason. Not yet." He moved to leave, then paused. "Your brothers are exceptional men, resourceful, intelligent, dangerous. They will attempt rescue operations. They will fail. I hope for everyone's sake they understand this quickly. They won't stop." "I know. That is what makes this interesting." He smiled. "Rest, Mrs. Moretti. Tomorrow we begin negotiations, and you will help me convince your family that paying my price is preferable to war." The door closed and locked with a sound like a coffin ceiling. Serafina stood in the center of luxury and captivity, hands still zip-tied, dress still stained with her brother's blood. Lorenzo was dead. She was a hostage in a stranger's mansion, and her daughter, her innocent daughter, was being used as leverage in a game she couldn't win. Serafina crossed to the window and looked out at manicured grounds surrounded by walls topped with security cameras. Somewhere out there, her brothers were planning her rescue. But Marcus was right. He held every advantage: money, resources, her unborn child. No amount of Moretti power could change the fundamental equation. She was trapped, and the only way out was through a darkness she'd spent her entire life avoiding. Serafina pressed her bound hands against the window and felt something crack inside her chest. Not her spirit, not her hope. Something harder. Something dangerous. For 7 years, Lorenzo had taught her that survival meant submission, that safety came from obedience, that love required sacrificing yourself piece by piece until nothing remained. He'd been wrong. Survival meant becoming the thing that terrified you, and Serafina Moretti was done being afraid. She looked down at her zip-tied wrists and smiled, cold and sharp and utterly ruthless. Marcus thought he'd captured a victim. He had no idea what he'd actually unleashed. The zip ties cut into Serafina's wrists as she worked them against the window latch with methodical precision. 3 hours of careful friction had worn through maybe 10% of the plastic. At this rate, she'd be free sometime next year. She needed a different approach. The suite Marcus had locked her in was designed for comfort, not imprisonment. Thick carpets, memory foam mattress, a bathroom stocked with luxury toiletries. But luxury meant sharp edges if you knew where to look. Serafina moved to the bathroom and examined everything with new eyes. The mirror was bolted to the wall. The shower had safety glass. But the vanity drawer held nail clippers, tweezers, and a small pair of scissors probably meant for trimming loose threads. She wedged the scissors between her knees and sawed at the zip tie with agonizing slowness. Her hands cramped. Her daughter kicked against her ribs like she could sense the urgency. Sweat dripped down Serafina's face as plastic fibers began to fray. 10 minutes later, the zip tie snapped. Her wrists burned with deep indentations, but she was free. Serafina stood there breathing hard, scissors still clutched in shaking hands, and forced herself to think clearly. She was in a fortified compound surrounded by armed guards, pregnant, alone, without weapons or backup or any realistic chance of escape. But she wasn't the same woman who'd stood drenched in punch on that casino stage. That woman had believed survival meant submission. This woman understood survival meant war. She moved to the bedroom door and tested it carefully, locked from the outside. Heavy deadbolt. No amount of scissors was getting through that. The windows were reinforced glass with security sensors. Breaking them would trigger alarms, so she'd have to be smarter. Serafina returned to the bathroom and turned on the shower at full heat. Steam began filling the space immediately. She opened the vanity and found a bottle of rubbing alcohol among the toiletries. Then she stripped the bed and tore the fitted sheet into long strips, tying them together with knots her brothers had taught her during summer sailing trips decades ago. The plan forming in her mind was insane, but insane was all she had left. She soaked one end of the makeshift rope in rubbing alcohol and wrapped it around the shower curtain rod. Then she grabbed the scissors and started working on the window frame, not trying to break through, just loosening the interior trim enough to create an opening. Her hands ached, her back screamed protest. Her daughter moved restlessly. "I know, baby," Serafina whispered. "Just hold on, we're getting out of here." 40 minutes later, she'd created a gap between the window and its frame. Barely 3 inches, but enough. She fed the fabric rope through and secured it to the radiator with knots that would hold her weight. The window wouldn't open, but the gap would let smoke through. Serafina lit the alcohol-soaked fabric with the vanity lighter she'd found and watched flames crawl up the makeshift rope toward the curtain rod. Then she grabbed towels, soaked them in the still-running shower, and pressed them against the gap around the door to keep smoke from escaping into the hallway. She needed the fire to get big enough to trigger sprinklers, but controlled enough not to kill her. The curtain rod caught with a whoosh of flame. Plastic curtain began melting, releasing toxic smoke that the bathroom fan couldn't handle. Serafina pulled her soaked sweater over her mouth and nose and crouched low while the fire grew. Within 3 minutes, the sprinkler system activated. Water cascaded from ceiling vents while alarms shrieked through the compound. Serafina heard shouting in Russian, running footsteps, the sound of her door being unlocked. The door slammed open and 2 guards rushed in, expecting to find her unconscious from smoke. Instead, she drove the scissors into the first guard's thigh with every ounce of strength she possessed. He screamed and went down. The second guard lunged for her, but Serafina was already moving, pregnant and exhausted and fueled by pure desperation. She grabbed the fallen guard's weapon, chambered around the way Adrian had taught her during those security briefings she'd ignored, and fired. The shot went wide, but the sound froze everyone. Serafina stood there, soaked and shaking, holding a gun she barely knew how to use, while smoke and sprinkler water turned the suite into chaos. "Back up," she gasped. "Both of you, now!" The uninjured guard raised his hands slowly. "Mrs. Moretti, please, you are pregnant. This is dangerous." "You think I don't know it's dangerous?" Her voice came out raw. "Your boss kidnapped me, killed my husband, is holding my family hostage. So yeah, it's fucking dangerous. Back up." They backed up. Serafina moved toward the door, keeping the weapon trained on them, despite her hands shaking so badly she could barely aim. Her daughter kicked hard against her ribs like protest or encouragement. She made it 3 steps into the hallway before more guards appeared. 5 of them, all armed, all positioned between her and any possible exit. Serafina's finger tightened on the trigger even though she knew it was suicide. Then Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone stand down!" The guards froze. Marcus emerged from a side hallway looking utterly unbothered by the alarms and sprinklers and armed pregnant woman in his compound. "Impressive," he said. "I underestimated you. Let me go." "No." "Then I start shooting. You will kill perhaps 1 person before my men kill you. Your daughter dies. Your brothers receive a body. Everyone loses." He approached slowly, hands visible and empty. "Or you can lower the weapon and we can discuss this like rational adults." "You're not a rational adult, you're a monster." "Perhaps, but I'm a monster with leverage. You are a monster with 1 bullet and very poor aim." He stopped 5 feet away. "What will it be, Mrs. Moretti?" Serafina's hand shook harder. Every instinct screamed at her to pull the trigger. But he was right. She'd get 1 shot, maybe. Then it would be over. and her daughter would die for her mother's pride. She lowered the weapon. Marcus took it from her with gentle efficiency and handed it to one of his guards. Take her to the medical suite. Make sure neither she nor the child were harmed. And someone turn off these damned sprinklers. 2 guards escorted Serafina through hallways that looked like European palace wings. The medical suite was larger than the bedroom. Hospital bed, monitoring equipment, cabinets full of supplies. The same nurse from earlier waited with professional detachment. She checked Serafina's vitals, performed an ultrasound, confirmed the baby showed no signs of distress. Then she bandaged the cuts on Serafina's wrists and administered something she claimed would help with stress. Serafina didn't have the energy to refuse. When the nurse left, Marcus appeared in the doorway holding 2 phones. Your brothers have been calling, he said, 63 times in the past 4 hours, very persistent. Let me talk to them. Of course, that is why I am here. He connected one of the phones to a speaker system. But first we establish rules. You tell them you are unharmed. You tell them cooperation is their only option. You do not mention escape attempts or give location details. Understood? And if I don't? Then we skip straight to the part where I send them pieces of you until they comply. He said it so casually, like discussing quarterly earnings instead of dismembering a pregnant woman. Serafina nodded. Marcus dialed. The line connected immediately. Sarah? Dominic's voice cracked through the speaker. Are you okay? Hearing him shattered something in her chest. I'm okay. The baby's okay. We're both alive. Where are you? I don't know, some kind of estate. Lorenzo is... We know. We saw. His voice went hard. Marcus, I know you're listening. Name your price. Marcus smiled and activated his microphone. Mr. Moretti, how professional. Your sister attempted escape tonight, set fire to my property, injured 2 guards, shot at my men. Silence on the other end. She has considerable spirit, Marcus continued. I can see why Lorenzo found her so difficult to control, but spirit without discipline is simply chaos, and chaos has consequences. If you hurt her, Adrian's voice cut in. You will what? Storm my compound? I have 40 armed men, military-grade security. You have money and reputation. Those do not stop bullets. Marcus leaned back in his chair. No, what you have is $200 million, and I have something you want. This is not complicated mathematics. We need time, Silas said. That kind of liquidity. You have 72 hours. Transfer instructions will be sent within the hour. If I receive full payment, your sister and her child go free. If I do not... He glanced at Serafina. Well, I am sure your imagination can supply the rest. Let us talk to her, Dominic demanded. Alone. Marcus considered this. 5 minutes. Unsupervised. But Mrs. Moretti, if you use this time to communicate location details or plan rescue operations, I will know, and I will respond accordingly. He left the room and closed the door. Serafina waited until his footsteps faded before speaking. Dom, he killed Lorenzo, just executed him in the warehouse. This isn't a negotiation. He's going to kill me no matter what you pay. We know, Dominic said quietly. We're working on it. Working on what? Getting you out. Adrian's voice. Silas traced the compound through security footage from traffic cameras. We know where you are. We're putting together a team. He has 40 guards. You can't... Sarah, listen to me. Dominic's voice cut through her panic. You did everything right tonight. The fire, the escape attempt. You bought us time to position assets. We've got thermal imaging on the compound, satellite surveillance, private military contractors who owe us favors. We're coming for you. When? Tomorrow night. Exactly 36 hours from now. Her heart hammered. That's not enough time to plan. It has to be. Every hour you're in there is another hour Marcus can change locations or increase security. We move fast or we don't move at all. Serafina pressed her hand against her belly. What do you need me to do? Stay alive. Stay alert. Tomorrow at midnight, there will be an explosion on the compound's north wall. That's your signal. Get to the east wing, 2nd floor, corner room overlooking the gardens. We'll extract you from there. The east wing is where Marcus's personal quarters are. We know. That's why he won't expect you there. It was insane. Suicidal. Exactly the kind of plan that got people killed. Okay. Serafina whispered. Okay, I'll be ready. Sarah, Dominic's voice softened. If something goes wrong, if you don't make the extraction point, don't. Listen to me. If something goes wrong, you protect that baby. You survive. You don't play hero. You do whatever it takes. Promise me. Tears burned her eyes. I promise. I love you. We all do. I love you too. The door opened. Marcus stepped back inside and disconnected the call with clinical precision. Touching, he said. Family bonds are so important. Pity they make you vulnerable. Serafina wiped her eyes. You're going to kill me anyway. After they pay, you can't leave witnesses. Perhaps, or perhaps I am exactly who I claim to be. A businessman completing a transaction. You will find out in 72 hours. He gestured toward the hospital bed. Rest now. Tomorrow we begin recording proof-of-life videos for your brothers. I want you looking healthy. Maternal. It encourages prompt payment. He left her alone in the medical suite with guards posted outside. Serafina lay on the hospital bed, staring at ceiling tiles and counting hours until midnight tomorrow. 36 hours. Less than 2 days to either freedom or death. She'd survived Lorenzo's cruelty for 7 years. She could survive this for 36 hours. Her daughter moved inside her and Serafina pressed her hand against the movement. We're going home, baby, she whispered. I promise. We're going home. The night passed in fragments of restless sleep, punctuated by nurses checking vitals and guards changing shifts. Serafina memorized patrol patterns through sheer repetition, 4 guards in hallways, 2 at each exterior door, thermal sensors on windows, motion detectors in gardens. The compound was a fortress, but every fortress had weaknesses. Morning brought the proof-of-life recording. Marcus positioned her in a tastefully decorated sitting room that could have been anywhere. She read from a script while cameras captured her swearing she was unharmed and begging her brothers to comply. The words tasted like poison. Very good, Marcus said. Most convincing. Your brothers will be moved to swift action. Because they love me. Because you are leverage. Love is simply the emotion that makes leverage effective. He spoke like he'd never experienced it. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe men like Marcus were born without the capacity for connection. Or maybe they'd learned to amputate it like a diseased limb. Either way, he'd never understand what that love meant, and that would be his weakness. The afternoon crawled past with agonizing slowness. Serafina ate mechanically when food appeared, took walks through approved hallways under guard supervision, smiled when nurses checked her daughter's heartbeat, all while counting down hours, 24 hours until extraction, 18 hours, 12. At 8 p.m., a guard escorted her to what Marcus called the family dining room, a space with a table that could seat 20 but currently held settings for 2. Marcus waited at the head, dressed for dinner like they were at a country club. Please sit. I thought we should share a meal before tomorrow's unpleasantness. Unpleasantness? The money transfer, the release negotiations, all very tedious but necessary. He poured wine for himself, water for her. Tell me, Mrs. Moretti, do you believe your brothers will actually pay? Yes. Without attempting rescue. They'll pay, and then they'll destroy you. Marcus smiled. Perhaps. Or perhaps they will realize that fighting me costs more than paying me. Either way, you are not my concern after tomorrow. You become their problem again. Serafina pushed food around her plate without eating. Why did you really take me? It's not about money. You said yourself you have billions. Principle, message, reputation. He cut his steak with surgical precision. When Lorenzo's empire collapsed, certain people began questioning whether my protection was worth the price. He gestured around the compound. This demonstrates that disrupting my operations carries consequences. Your brothers pay. You go free. Everyone learns the lesson. And if they don't pay, then everyone learns a different lesson about what happens to people who underestimate me. The casual certainty chilled her blood. They finished dinner in silence. Guards escorted Serafina back to her suite, not the medical wing this time, but a bedroom even larger than the first, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens, bathroom with a soaking tub, clothes laid out in her size. Marcus was giving her luxury before whatever came tomorrow. Serafina showered and changed into the provided nightgown. Then she sat by the window watching guards patrol the grounds below, while her phone, the one Marcus let her keep for proof of life calls, showed 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until extraction. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. Every instinct screamed that this was suicide, that Marcus's security was too good, that her brothers would be walking into a trap. But she'd promised to be ready. At 11:55, she moved to the bathroom and locked herself inside. Ran water in the sink to mask sounds. Then she dressed in the darkest clothes she could find and waited. Midnight arrived with the precision of a bomb. The explosion shook the entire compound. Windows rattled. Alarms shrieked. She heard guards shouting in Russian, boots pounding through hallways, automatic weapons being loaded. This was it. Serafina unlocked the bathroom door and moved into chaos. Guards sprinted past her room toward the north wall, where smoke and flames billowed into the night sky. She slipped into the hallway and headed east, away from the explosion, toward Marcus's private quarters. Every step felt like walking through fire. Her legs shook. Her daughter kicked frantically. She pressed one hand against her belly and kept moving. The east wing was quieter. Most guards had rushed toward the threat. She found the corner room overlooking gardens exactly where Dominic had described it. The door was locked. Serafina looked around frantically. No time to picket. No tools. No... A second explosion rocked the compound. This one closer. Windows shattered somewhere below. More alarms, more shouting. The locked door swung open from inside. Silas stood there in tactical gear, holding a weapon like he'd done this before. "Move!" he snapped. Serafina didn't need to be told twice. She followed him through Marcus's private study toward windows that opened onto gardens. Rope ladders dropped from above. Extraction team on the roof. "Go," Silas ordered. "Dominic's waiting at the perimeter." "What about you?" "I'm making sure Marcus understands the consequences of taking my sister." His expression was cold enough to freeze blood. Before Serafina could respond, he shoved her toward the window. She climbed onto the ladder with shaking hands. Her pregnant belly made it nearly impossible, but adrenaline and desperation carried her down 3 stories, while bullets shredded the night around her. She hit the ground and hands grabbed her immediately. Adrian's team, pulling her toward the wall where a section had been blown open. They ran. Through gardens. Over rubble. Past bodies of guards who'd been in the wrong place. Serafina's lungs burned. Her legs threatened to give out. But Adrian's men half-carried her toward the perimeter where an armored SUV waited with engine running. Dominic stood beside it, shoulder bandaged, but alive. She threw herself into his arms, and he caught her like she weighed nothing. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you." Behind them, the compound erupted in flames. Serafina looked back and saw Marcus's fortress burning while helicopters circled overhead, and more explosions lit the night. "Silas!" she gasped. "He's coming," Dominic assured her. "He just needed to deliver a message first." They loaded into the SUV and it tore away from the compound at speeds that should have been illegal. Serafina pressed against the window, watching fire consume the place that had held her captive. Then she saw him. Marcus Volkov, standing in the driveway, clothes singed, surrounded by his remaining guards. He stared directly at their departing vehicle with an expression that promised this wasn't over. Not even close. "He's alive," Serafina whispered. "For now," Adrian said grimly. The SUV merged onto the highway, while behind them, sirens screamed and the compound burned. Serafina's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her daughter kicked so hard it hurt. They'd escaped. But Marcus was still out there. And judging by the cold fury in his eyes, he was going to make them all pay for tonight. The SUV pulled into an underground garage beneath a building Serafina didn't recognize. Armed guards waited, along with medical personnel and someone who looked like a trauma counselor. They escorted her into an elevator that descended instead of rising. Bunker, not building. "Where are we?" she asked. "Safe house," Dominic replied. 3 stories underground, reinforced walls, separate power supply. Enough security to stop a small army. Marcus has more than a small army. "We know." The elevator opened into a space that looked like a luxury apartment had been built inside a missile silo. Comfortable furniture, warm lighting, hospital equipment in the corner. Medical staff checked Serafina and her daughter immediately. Both healthy. both alive. Minor cuts and bruises from the escape, but nothing serious. Physically, she was fine. Emotionally, she was fracturing. "Lorenzo's dead," she whispered to no one in particular. "Yes," Dominic confirmed. "Marcus killed him right in front of me." "I know. And now he's coming for all of us." Dominic knelt in front of where she sat and took both her hands. "Marcus made a mistake tonight. He let you go. That means he's vulnerable. And we're going to use that." "How?" "By doing what Morettis do best." His smile was cold enough to freeze. "We're going to destroy him completely." The bunker door opened and Silas walked in covered in ash and blood that probably wasn't his own. He looked at Serafina and something in his expression softened. "You okay?" She nodded because words wouldn't come. "Good." He turned to Dominic. "Marcus survived. Lost half his compound and most of his men, but he survived." "Expected," Dominic replied. "He's going to retaliate." "Also expected." Adrian appeared from a side room with a tablet. "We need to move fast. Marcus's network is bigger than we thought. He's got connections to 3 governments, 2 cartels, and at least 1 terrorist organization. Fighting him head-on is suicide." "Then we don't fight him head-on," Silas said. "We dismantle his infrastructure piece by piece until there's nothing left." They started talking strategy. Shell corporations to freeze, allies to turn, politicians to pressure. Serafina listened to her brothers plan the systematic destruction of a man who'd held her captive and realized something profound. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was the reason this war had started, and she needed to help finish it. "I want in," she said quietly. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. "Sarah, you need rest," Dominic started. "I spent 2 days in that compound. I know his patterns, his guards, his routines. You need that information." "We can debrief you later." "No, we do it now, because Marcus is planning his next move right now, and we need to be faster." She stood up despite exhaustion and pregnancy and fear. "I'm done being protected. I'm done watching other people fight my battles. Lorenzo spent 7 years teaching me that I was powerless. Marcus spent 2 days proving him right. I'm finished with both of them." Silas smiled slowly. She's her mother's daughter. Dominic studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "Okay, tell us everything." Serafina walked them through every detail: guard rotations, weak points in security, Marcus's daily schedule, the layout of rooms she'd seen, conversations she'd overheard. Her brothers took notes with professional precision, while the trauma counselor watched with obvious concern. When she finished, Adrian had a digital map of Marcus's compound marked with vulnerabilities. "This is good," he said. "Really good. We can use this." "What's the play?" Silas asked. Dominic studied the map. "Marcus operates like a king, protected fortress, loyal subjects, absolute authority. So we don't attack the king, we turn his subjects, make them understand that loyalty to him is a death sentence." "How?" Serafina asked. "By showing them what happens when you cross the Moretti family." The way he said it made her blood run cold. Her brothers weren't just planning revenge. They were planning annihilation. And watching them work, Serafina realized she'd spent 7 years with the wrong kind of dangerous men. Lorenzo had been dangerous because he was cruel and unpredictable. Her brothers were dangerous because they were methodical and absolutely ruthless when protecting family. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Dominic looked up from the map. "I need you to trust us, and I need you to prepare for war." Outside their bunker fortress, Chicago slept while monsters plotted in the darkness. Marcus Volkov was coming. But the Moretti family was ready. And this time, there would be no mercy. Only justice delivered in fire and blood. Serafina pressed her hand against her daughter's movements and made a silent promise. No one would ever threaten them again, because she was done being prey. It was time to become the predator. The war against Marcus Volkov began at dawn. Silas sat in the bunker's command center, surrounded by screens displaying financial networks, encrypted communications, and surveillance feeds from 6 continents. His fingers moved across keyboards with surgical precision, while numbers cascaded down monitors like digital rain. "First wave complete," he announced. "Frozen 400 million in operational accounts. His shell corporations in Luxembourg just got flagged by Interpol. Swiss banks are cooperating. Adrian paced near the weapons cache, checking ammunition loads. What about his political protection? Senator Briggs resigned an hour ago, citing health concerns. Silas smiled coldly. Amazing how quickly terminal illnesses develop when your offshore accounts disappear. Dominic stood near the tactical map marking targets with red pins. Each pin represented a piece of Marcus's network: warehouses, shipping routes, encrypted servers, blackmail files. Dismantling an empire required understanding its architecture completely. Serafina watched from the medical suite where nurses monitored her daughter's heartbeat. She'd slept maybe 3 hours in the past 48. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind refused to cooperate, because Marcus was still out there, and men like him didn't surrender quietly. Sarah. Dominic appeared in the doorway. You should eat something. I'm not hungry. The baby needs nutrition. She looked at him with exhaustion carved into every line of her face. The baby needs her mother alive. That requires finishing this. We're handling it. Are you? She stood up carefully. Because from where I'm sitting, we burned his compound and froze some accounts. That's not victory. That's provocation. It's the opening move. And his response? Dominic's expression darkened. We're monitoring for it. As if summoned by the conversation, alarms shrieked through the bunker. Everyone rushed to the command center where Silas had pulled up news feeds from across Chicago. Jesus Christ, Adrian breathed. Marcus hadn't responded with violence. He'd responded with information. Every major news outlet was simultaneously broadcasting leaked documents, tax returns, private communications, business deals, offshore accounts. But not Marcus's records. The Moretti family's records. Decades of carefully constructed privacy shredded in real time. How did he... Serafina started. Doesn't matter how, Silas interrupted, fingers flying across keyboards. He's had years to gather this. We need damage control. Now. Phone calls erupted across the bunker. Lawyers, PR firms, political contacts, everyone scrambling to contain the explosion, while Marcus systematically exposed every gray area the Moretti family had ever operated in. None of it was illegal. But legality wasn't the point. The point was demonstrating that attacking him carried consequences nobody could afford. He's trying to destroy our reputation, Adrian said. No. Dominic studied the feeds with disturbing calm. He's trying to make us choose between protecting ourselves and protecting Sarah. If we focus on damage control, he has time to regroup. If we keep attacking him, the public exposure gets worse. So what do we do? Dominic turned to look at Serafina standing in the doorway. We asked the person he actually wronged. Every eye in the command center turned toward her. Serafina felt the weight of that attention, her brothers waiting for her decision, Marcus's attack scrolling across screens, her daughter moving inside her belly, like a reminder of everything she stood to lose. Burn it all, she said quietly. Sarah, Dominic started. You heard me. Burn it all. Every connection Marcus has, every account, every ally. I don't care what it costs us. I don't care how much exposure we take. That man kidnapped me, murdered Lorenzo, and threatened my unborn child. So yes, burn it all and let him watch his empire turn to ash. Silas smiled slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. Within the hour, the Moretti family stopped playing defense and went scorched earth. Silas didn't just freeze Marcus's accounts. He seized them through legal channels so complex it would take years to untangle. He leaked Marcus's own records to the same news outlets, creating a narrative war where both sides bled credibility. Adrian didn't just cut off Marcus's political protection. He activated every favor the Moretti family had accumulated over 3 decades. Senators, judges, federal prosecutors, all simultaneously launching investigations that would bury Marcus in legal warfare. Dominic didn't just dismantle the trafficking network. He turned Marcus's own people against him by offering immunity deals so generous that loyalty became financially irresponsible. And Serafina provided the ammunition. Every detail she remembered from her captivity, every conversation, every weakness. She sat with federal investigators for 6 hours straight, building a case so airtight that Marcus's lawyers were already discussing plea agreements. By nightfall, Marcus Volkov's empire was collapsing in real time. His lieutenants were arrested across 4 countries. His shipping routes were seized. His blackmail files were exposed, sending corrupt officials scrambling for cover. Even his Russian mob connections started distancing themselves because association had become too expensive. But Marcus himself remained free. Somewhere in Chicago, wounded and furious, planning his response. "He'll come for us directly," Adrian said. "No more proxies, no more strategy, just violence." "Good," Dominic replied. "Let him come to us." The bunker transformed into a fortress waiting for siege, armed guards, surveillance systems, reinforced doors that could withstand explosives. They'd turned 3 stories of underground concrete into the safest place in Chicago, or so they thought. At 2 in the morning, the power died. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red. Backup generators should have activated within seconds. They didn't. "Someone's in the electrical system," Silas said, pulling up schematics. "They're not just cutting power, they're killing the generators." "How is that possible?" Adrian demanded. "This bunker has its own independent—" An explosion rocked the ceiling. Concrete dust rained down. Structural alarms screamed. Another explosion. Then another. Precision charges targeting support columns. Marcus wasn't trying to break in. He was trying to bring the entire building down on top of them. "We need to evacuate!" Dominic shouted over the chaos. "Now!" Guards rushed Serafina toward the emergency exit while explosions continued shaking the bunker. She could barely breathe through the dust. Her daughter kicked frantically, like she could sense the danger. They made it to the stairwell before the next explosion sealed it shut. Concrete and steel crashed down, blocking their escape route. The bunker groaned like a dying animal while secondary charges detonated throughout the structure. "Alternative exit!" Adrian yelled, but Silas was already shaking his head. "He blocked them all, every road out. We're trapped." The words hung in dust-filled air while the ceiling cracked ominously overhead. Marcus had planned this perfectly. While they'd been dismantling his empire, he'd been studying their fortress, finding its weaknesses, preparing for one final strike. "The maintenance tunnels," Serafina said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "What maintenance tunnels?" Dominic demanded. "When I was a kid, you brought me here once. Some kind of emergency drill. You showed me tunnels that connected to the city's old infrastructure." She pointed toward a wall. "Through there, behind the medical suite." Dominic's eyes widened. "That was 20 years ago. Those tunnels are probably collapsed. They're our only option." Another explosion, closer this time. The bunker's structural integrity was failing. They ran. Through the medical suite, into a storage room Serafina barely remembered, toward a maintenance hatch hidden behind shelving. Dominic tore the shelves away and yanked the hatch open, revealing darkness and the smell of stagnant water. "Ladies first," Adrian said grimly. Serafina lowered herself into the tunnel, 6 months pregnant and terrified. The space was barely wide enough for her to move. Cold water soaked through her clothes immediately. Behind her, she heard her brothers and their security team descending. They moved through darkness, guided only by flashlights and Serafina's fragmented childhood memories. The tunnel branched in multiple directions. Some collapsed, some flooded, all terrifying. Behind them, the bunker's death continued. Explosions. Groaning metal. The sound of 3 stories of concrete surrendering to gravity. "Keep moving," Dominic urged. Serafina's hands trembled as she navigated through pitch black. Water rose to her knees. Her daughter kicked against her ribs. Every step felt like it might be her last. Then she saw light ahead, a great opening onto a storm drain. Freedom. Adrian reached it first and kicked the grate free. They emerged into Chicago's underground storm system, climbing up rusted ladders toward street level while sirens wailed above. They surfaced in an alley 3 blocks from the bunker just as the structure finally collapsed completely. The sound of that destruction echoed through downtown Chicago like thunder. Serafina stood there soaked and shaking, watching smoke rise from where their fortress had been. "He's not stopping," she whispered. "He's never going to stop." "Then neither do we," Dominic said, but his voice carried exhaustion that matched her own. They'd been fighting for 3 days straight, no sleep, no rest, just constant warfare, and Marcus still had resources they hadn't accounted for. Adrian's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his face went pale. "We have a problem." "Another one?" Marcus just leaked Sarah's hospital location. The words took a moment to register. Then Serafina understood. Her medical records, her due date, the private hospital where she'd planned to deliver. Marcus was telling the world exactly where to find her when she was most vulnerable. "We moved the delivery," Dominic said immediately. "To where?" Silas demanded. "Every secure facility we have access to is either compromised or under surveillance. He's forcing us into the open." "Then we go somewhere he can't follow." "There is nowhere he can't follow. The man has resources across 6 continents." They stood in that alley, arguing, while Serafina felt her daughter moving and realized something profound. She was done running. "No more hiding," she said quietly. Her brothers stopped arguing. "What?" Dominic asked. "I said no more hiding. We've been reacting to Marcus since this started, playing defense, running. But he wants me to be afraid. He wants me to feel powerless. That's how men like him win. Not by being stronger, but by making you believe you're weaker." "Sarah, you're 6 months pregnant, which is exactly why I need to end this now. Before she's born, before he has another hostage to use against us." She met Dominic's eyes. "You taught me that Moretti's don't surrender. So let's stop surrendering." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop trying to dismantle his empire quietly and just destroy him, publicly, completely, so thoroughly that nobody ever makes the mistake of threatening this family again." Adrian studied her face. "You want to go to war." "I want to finish the war we're already in." Silas pulled out his tablet and started typing. "If we're doing this, we need to do it right. Total information warfare. We expose everything: his trafficking routes, his political connections, his involvement in Sarah's kidnapping. Make him so toxic that his own allies turn on him." "And if he retaliates?" Dominic asked. "Let him try. We'll be ready." They worked through the night coordinating with journalists, federal prosecutors, international law enforcement. By dawn, Marcus Volkov's face was on every news channel in the world, not as a businessman, as a monster. Trafficking networks exposed in graphic detail, photographs of victims, testimony from survivors, financial records proving he'd profited from human suffering for decades. The Moretti family didn't just leak evidence. They orchestrated a media campaign so devastating that Marcus's name became synonymous with evil. His political allies abandoned him within hours. His business partners severed ties. Countries where he'd operated for years suddenly remembered they had extradition treaties. By noon, Interpol had issued an international warrant. By evening, his remaining strongholds were raided simultaneously across 3 continents. And at midnight, federal agents surrounded his last known location, a penthouse in downtown Chicago where he'd barricaded himself with his remaining loyal guards. The Moretti family watched the siege unfold on live television from a secure location Silas had arranged. Serafina sat there 6 months pregnant, exhausted beyond measure, watching the man who'd terrorized her get dragged out in handcuffs while cameras captured every moment. Marcus looked directly at one camera as agents loaded him into an armored vehicle. Even in defeat, his eyes promised revenge. But Serafina didn't feel fear anymore. She felt tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you. "It's over," Dominic said quietly. "Is it?" she asked. "He's going to prison for the rest of his life. Multiple countries want him. He'll spend years fighting extradition before the first trial even starts. And we've made sure every prison he might end up in knows exactly what he did." "Prisoners don't like human traffickers," Adrian added. "He'll be lucky to survive his first week inside." Serafina should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she just felt hollow. Lorenzo was dead. Marcus was arrested. Her brothers had gone to war for her, and she'd survived everything that should have killed her. But survival wasn't the same as healing. That would take longer. 3 months later, snow fell softly across Chicago while Serafina stood at the window of a private hospital suite watching the city wake up. Her daughter, Valentina Rose Moretti, slept peacefully in her arms, 8 pounds of perfect humanity wrapped in pink blankets. Dominic stood near the door pretending he wasn't crying. Adrian argued with hospital staff about security protocols even though there were no more threats. Silas had bought half the maternity ward's inventory before dawn. For the first time in what felt like forever, the room held laughter instead of fear. Marcus Volkov was serving consecutive life sentences in a maximum security facility where his former associates had already made multiple attempts on his life. Lorenzo was buried in a cemetery Serafina would never visit. The compound had been demolished. The legal battles were ongoing but manageable. And somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. She has your eyes, Dominic said softly. Serafina looked down at her daughter and saw Lorenzo in the shape of her face, the curve of her lips. But she also saw herself, her own stubborn determination, her mother's strength, her brother's fierce protection. Valentina was both the worst thing Lorenzo had ever done to her and the best thing that had come from 7 years of terrible choices. I'm going to tell her the truth, Serafina said. When she's old enough, all of it. What her father was, what he did, what I survived. Why? Adrian asked. Because she deserves to know that sometimes love looks like devotion and sometimes it looks like destruction. And learning to tell the difference might save her life someday. The brothers were quiet for a long moment. Mom would have been proud of you, Silas said finally. Serafina felt tears burning her eyes. I don't know about that. I made a lot of mistakes. You survived them. That's what matters. She looked at her 3 brothers, these men who'd spent 5 years watching her destroy herself and never stopped trying to bring her home, who'd gone to war for her, who'd risked everything to keep her alive. I'm sorry, she whispered, for cutting you out, for choosing Lorenzo, for being so stubborn that you had to watch me suffer. Don't, Dominic said firmly. You don't apologize for being manipulated. Lorenzo was a professional. He knew exactly how to exploit someone who wanted to prove their independence. I still chose him. You chose what you thought was love. You couldn't have known what he'd become. Serafina wanted to believe that. But late at night, when Valentina cried and she saw Lorenzo's features in her daughter's face, she wondered if some part of her had always known, if she'd ignored red flags because acknowledging them and admitting she'd been wrong. Do you think I'm a good mother? She asked quietly. All 3 brothers looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Sarah, Adrian said, you survived kidnapping while pregnant, escaped from a fortified compound, helped dismantle an international crime network, and you did it all while protecting that baby. Yes, you're a good mother. But what if I mess her up? What if You won't. Dominic moved to sit beside her. You know what real love looks like now. You know what abuse looks like. You know the difference between protection and control. That knowledge will make you a better mother than most people ever get to be. Valentina stirred in Serafina's arms and made a small sound that might have been contentment or gas, but felt like forgiveness either way. The hospital room gradually filled with morning light, while Chicago's skyline glittered beyond the windows. Serafina had spent 7 years in this city, first as Lorenzo's wife, then as his victim, finally as a survivor. She didn't know if she wanted to stay. I've been thinking about moving, she said. Where? Silas asked. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere Valentina can grow up without her father's legacy hanging over everything. Maybe the coast. Maybe Europe. I don't know yet. Her brothers exchanged glances. We'll come with you, Dominic said simply. You can't just uproot your entire lives. Watch us. The certainty in his voice made her chest tight. For 7 years, she'd believed that needing people made her weak, that dependence was a character flaw, that real strength meant standing alone. Lorenzo had taught her that. Her brothers were teaching her something different. That strength sometimes looked like asking for help. That family meant showing up even when it was inconvenient. That love wasn't about possession or control. It was about being there when someone needed you most. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not giving up on me. Even when I gave up on myself. Dominic took her hand. We're Moretti's, Sarah. We don't give up, period. A nurse knocked softly before entering with paperwork and post-delivery instructions. Serafina signed forms while Valentina slept, and her brothers coordinated security details and argued about who got to hold the baby next. For the first time since standing drenched in punch on that casino stage, Serafina felt something that might eventually become peace. She wasn't there yet. The nightmares still came. The fear still lingered. She still woke up at 3 a.m. checking locks and thinking she heard Lorenzo's voice. But she was healing, and that was enough for now. Later that evening, when her brothers had finally been convinced to get some sleep and the hospital quieted down, Serafina stood alone at the window holding her daughter and watching snow fall over Chicago. She thought about the girl she'd been at 23, so desperate to prove her independence that she'd walked away from everyone who actually loved her. About the woman she'd become at 30, harder, sadder, infinitely more careful about who she trusted. About the mother she wanted to be. I'm going to do better by you, she whispered to Valentina. I'm going to teach you that love shouldn't hurt, that needing people doesn't make you weak, that walking away from something toxic is strength, not failure. Valentina made a small sound and her tiny hand curled around Serafina's finger with surprising strength. In that moment, holding her daughter while snow fell softly beyond the window, Serafina understood something fundamental about survival. It wasn't about being unbreakable. It wasn't about never falling apart. It was about picking yourself up afterward, about learning from the destruction, about building something better from the wreckage. Lorenzo had tried to destroy her. Marcus had tried to use her. But she was still standing, still breathing, still fighting for a future where her daughter would never have to learn these lessons the hard way. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The hospital room door opened and a woman in her 40s entered carrying flowers and wearing an expression of careful hope. I'm sorry to intrude, the woman said quietly. The nurses said you might be awake. I'm Isabella Reyes. Serafina's entire body went rigid. Lorenzo's first wife stood in the doorway, looking as exhausted and damaged as Serafina felt. I don't want trouble, Isabella said quickly. I wanted to see if you were okay, and to say I'm sorry. Sorry for what? For not coming forward sooner. I knew about you. Lorenzo told me you were a business partner, but I knew. Her voice cracked. I was afraid. Of him. Of what he'd do if I left. So I stayed quiet and let him hurt you, and I'm so sorry. Serafina looked at this woman, another one of Lorenzo's victims, trapped in her own version of the nightmare. She could be angry, resentful, bitter that Isabella had known and said nothing, but what would that accomplish? It's not your fault, Serafina said finally. He was good at making us feel like we didn't have choices. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Is it true? That he's really dead? Yes. Good. The word came out sharp and relieved. I hope he suffered. They stood there in the hospital room, two women who'd loved the same monster and survived him. Isabella's children were being raised by her sister in Florida. Serafina's daughter slept peacefully in her arms. They'd never be friends, but they understood each other in a way nobody else could. What will you do now? Serafina asked. Therapy. Lots of therapy. And try to rebuild a life for my kids that doesn't include their father's legacy. Isabella managed a broken smile. What about you? Same. Different coast, maybe. But same general idea. Isabella set the flowers on a side table and moved toward the door. Then she paused and looked back at Serafina with an expression that carried years of damage. We survived him, she said quietly. Yeah, we did. That's worth something. Everything, Serafina corrected. That's worth everything. After Isabella left, Serafina stood alone with her daughter and thought about all the women who'd survived men like Lorenzo, who'd rebuilt themselves from wreckage, who'd learned to trust again despite every reason not to. She was one of them now. Not a victim, not broken, just someone who'd walked through fire and come out different on the other side. The hospital room door opened again, and this time it was Dominic carrying coffee and looking protective. Who was that? He asked. Isabella, Lorenzo's first wife. His expression darkened. What did she want? To apologize, to see if I was okay, to know she wasn't alone. Serafina looked at her brother. She has 2 kids, Dom. They lost their father, too. Lorenzo wasn't a father. He was a monster who had children. I know, but those kids didn't choose him any more than Valentina did. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. You're a better person than I am. No, I just understand what it's like to be collateral damage in someone else's war. He moved to stand beside her at the window. Together they watched Chicago's nighttime skyline while Valentina slept and the world kept turning despite everything that had happened. What are you thinking about? Dominic asked. How different my life looks from what I imagined at 23. Better or worse? Serafina looked down at her daughter. More complicated, more painful, but also more real. Real is underrated. She smiled despite everything. When did you get philosophical? When I spent 5 years watching my sister survive hell and come out stronger. I don't feel stronger. You are, though. Strength isn't about not falling apart. It's about putting yourself back together afterward. The words settled into her chest like truth finding its home. She had fallen apart. Multiple times. In that casino. In Marcus's compound. In the moments after Lorenzo's death when she'd realized her daughter would never know her father. But she'd also put herself back together. Different. Changed. But whole in a new way. "I'm going to be okay," she said quietly. More to herself than to Dominic. "I know you are." "How do you know?" "Because you're your mother's daughter, and she survived impossible things too." Serafina felt tears burning but didn't let them fall. Not yet. She'd cried enough for one lifetime. Now she needed to focus on building something worth surviving for. Her daughter. Her family. A future where Valentina never had to learn these lessons firsthand. That was worth fighting for. Worth living for. Worth surviving for. Snow continued falling over Chicago while inside a hospital room, a woman who'd lost everything discovered she still had what mattered most. Family who loved her, a daughter who needed her, and the hard-won knowledge that surviving wasn't the same as living, but it was the necessary first step. Serafina Moretti had survived Lorenzo De Luca's cruelty and Marcus Volkov's revenge, and her own terrible choices. Now she just had to figure out how to live with the woman she'd become. But for the first time in 7 years, she believed she could. And that belief, fragile and new and hard-earned, felt like the beginning of freedom, the kind that couldn't be taken away, only chosen, again and again and again.